Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We are back to a live episode with the Explicit Measures Podcast with Mike, Tommy, and Seth.
Happy Tuesday.
Here we go. It's been too long. From a Tuesday to it's like been a week, but we haven't seen each other on a phone for a period of time. We talk online, like a Teams chat a little bit here, but we don't do video calls. It's been a while.
It's been 6 days.
Tommy's been going through withdrawals.
Withdrawal. Well, now that I knew you're out of the country, welcome back, by the way.
Well, thank you. It's so for those who did not follow or didn't catch me on Twitter or something like that, I was able to attend the Power BI Next conference over in Copenhagen. This was there's a lot of firsts here. It was first time into Copenhagen. I've never been there before. Never been to Europe before, so first time to Europe. First time for probably a really, really long plane flight, a 7-hour flight. We went Milwaukee, Chicago, and then Chicago all the way over to Copenhagen with a direct flight, which was, dude, if you can go direct flights to cities in Europe, that's the way to go. And for all intents and purposes, COVID's over in Copenhagen. They're like it's done for them. No one's wearing masks. Everyone's just out and about. It was a very cool experience. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. The team used set the event up. He's the gentleman who does the Power BI quiz. So he's done 2 seasons of Power BI quiz, and he's on YouTube as well. I'd highly recommend. That's a lot of fun. He gets a bunch of experts across the industry to come talk about it, and it was awesome. My wife could not stand all the Danishes. She was just in love. We made a mistake. We sat too far away from the kitchen the first day, and so we as we're getting food for breakfast, these hot, really good croissants come out, and they're really good. They're better than I don't know how they do it. There's magic they put into them. They're so good. They're so flaky. It's amazing. So we're too far away. She finds a couple of them that are hot, and we've said, okay, from now on, we need to sit next to the kitchen where the croissants come out. And so as soon as they come out, we're like, okay, go get one. They're so good.
Clearly, I need some more coffee because when you said my wife cannot stand all of the Danishes, I'm like, what does she have wrong against the Danish people?
It was no, not at all.
I was like,
we rode around
she had fun with the Danishes.
Oh yes,
fun with the Danishes.
Yes, very, very good.
Ironically enough, you described for a guy like me who can't eat the gluten, the one thing that I miss,
yes,
and that is a croissant.
Yeah.
So your description of the
you put a little butter on it.
Wonderfulness.
Oh my gosh.
Of a warm croissant, Mike.
Well, and in the U.S. they're a little bit more dense. I mean, you bite into them and there's some material there, but when you eat them over there, they're very airy, very light, and it melts. It's
like
amazing.
A good breakfast because that's what they do for breakfast, right?
Totally. Yeah. Every breakfast had them.
What a breakfast, man!
What a breakfast! I'd fly all the way over there to get another one of those things again, just for that. The team was amazing.
Overall, how was it?
Oh, the conference was great. It was a smaller conference. I think we had 170, 120. I can't remember exactly the number. So it wasn't a very large conference. But man, we had some big hitters. Marco Russo was there. Chris Webb was there. We had Casper on BI was there.
Nice.
I'm trying to remember all the names. There's so many. Benny was there. Wolfgang was there. There were so many really wonderful MVPs. And Marco Russo made a comment. He was talking about. He called Alberto Ferrari after he'd flown there. He's like, Alberto, we're back. We can move. We can go travel and see people again. He's like, this feels like normal. This is like 2019 again. I was like, that's a really good point and a really good observation. I was like, yeah, this is the first time I've seen kind of our friends, our international friends. With
jealous.
It was fun. So super enjoyed it. Just was an amazing host. Everyone there was super accommodating, and the English is so easy there. So I don't know how it is in other countries in Europe, but certain countries I've heard that you go to, they just don't talk English to you. You're the tourist. You come in, you talk their language.
They speak their own language.
Yeah. You go in, and the expectation is you just speak, whatever, Spanish or Portuguese or wherever you go, you speak what you're there for. And so I did not realize this because they would say something hello in Danish, and then I would just say hello in English, and they just would switch in a heartbeat. They're like, oh, hello, and they would just talk to English. And so it's super easy. Yeah. So if you haven't traveled before, Kelly, my wife, who's done a lot of traveling over in Europe, said this was probably the easiest place for Americans to go aside from some of the weird metro names on the metro, there's a lot of words I can't say.
Where are we going? Yeah,
exactly. I don't know where we're going. We're going to that funny word right there. That's the one we get off on. So
you did a session on Charticulator?
Yeah, I did another session on Charticulator. That's kind of been my run for this year. I've done probably about 4 or 5 sessions of that now. It's the one I'll be doing in Houston as well. But man, it was good. I had a packed room, a lot of great questions, people trying to figure things out, how to work it. I think a lot of part of this is, particularly for that in speaking engagement, is people don't know when to use it. Like when's an appropriate time to use the Charticulator app versus try to make it work in standard apps, because you can do a lot with standard apps with measures and complicated measures, but what's that decision point? Like when do I go into that more custom range?
Yeah.
So
did you point them to our podcast to listen to?
Oh, I had podcasts everywhere.
We recommended.
Yeah. Podcast was everywhere.
Like, hey, if you guys want to listen more about how to use or when to use,
it was a footer of every slide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I did get asked, Mike, did you buy Tommy his dinner yet? So I know that's a true fan right there when they know about our bets. So
you can't even travel out of the country for someone to ask you.
I'm getting ribbed all the way in a different country to buy Tommy dinner, and they're like, "You're gonna find any way to get out of this." No, I was like, "No. If it's really true, if it's really a thing, I will buy Tommy a dinner." So when we do the dinner. And when I buy Tommy, what do you tell me? You said you're getting a big thing of pasta?
Whatever we need to do. I'm happy with whatever you buy.
Tommy wants a steak. Tommy gets. We have to take a big picture of this, and we'll have to tweet it. That way, people know that I have met the end of the deal.
You've met your deed. Yeah, you've paid your debt.
I've paid my debt. That's awesome. Well, so let's transition and talk about the trip the whole time. As fun as it was, let's move on to the actual topic of the day. So today's topic is around how do you clean up your data models, and what are the tools that you use to clean the data models? I think this is going to be a good topic. Tommy, kick us off. Go run us through some stuff. Like, what's your process here? How do you clean up, and maybe frame it like, what does clean up your model mean to you?
Yeah. So as we were kind of putting this topic together, you realize it doesn't matter if you're just starting out in Power BI, a veteran, an all-star, seasoned pro, you're going to run into a situation where you have a messy model or a complicated model. Something's bloated, either something doesn't work or it just runs slowly. No matter what, it will always happen to you. So it's not so much about avoiding those situations as the ability to be able to audit and clean your model. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was thinking too was there's kind of like 2 things that always happen to me when the time comes to clean a model. It's either something just does not work in a report where it's like, I can't publish this, it's running really slow, or the query doesn't, like, it's just at a point where you can't refresh it. So you really have to go back and just figure out, why can't I refresh in the gateway? I can't refresh it manually. Something is not optimized here. So that's where I see kind of the true approaches of where I go for really the point of cleaning up. DAX is running slow, visual is running slow, or the report is just at a state where we need to go and figure out what the heck is wrong to get this back running smoothly, or running at all.
Sure.
So that's how I'll preface it for me on kind of where I'm looking at cleaning.
Yep. So Seth, real quick before we go into the tools that we use at this point.
Yeah.
In your mind, Seth, does that definition fit how you perceive cleaning of a model, or do you have some points there you want to add?
No, I think yes, it does. It also depends on who's looking at the model, right?
That's true.
Determining the cleaning.
Yeah.
I think what goes along here, right, with performance and load times or issues with the model is when you open up somebody else's model and there's like 100 tables in it. You're like,
that's a whole other,
I get it. So the challenges of when you start to treat a model like a relational database instead of facts and dimensions and proper star schema or slight snowflake schema models, there's a lot to be said when spider webs are found around performance problems.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a whole nother point that I almost didn't think about is I was kind of coming in from my reports. It's like, it's gone too bloated.
Yep.
And that's a lot easier usually because you kind of know the design process.
Oh, totally.
But if you're
and
going
you
to
built
someone
most
else,
of it. Yeah. So
yeah, so
yeah.
you kind of, you know, the Indiana Jones, you can backtrack kind of thing. You know where you put the rope.
Yep. Exactly.
But when you're dealing with someone else's model, going into that is a whole other approach.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. So I would agree. So certain things are a couple key points or things that I look to make sure if I'm given a model. So there's like kind of two perspectives here, right? If I'm making my own model, what happens in that making process? And then on the other hand of this, there's like this: I've been given a model, and now how do I clean it up? So as a consultant, I'm given a lot of different models, and I see a lot of different ways of people building things. And I've been given models from people who are really sharp and know exactly what the Tabular model's doing. I have other models that are like, it looks like they didn't know what they're doing. There's some weird relationships. We're getting some odd things. And they're like, I want this data to do something X, Y, Z. And you look at the model and go, well, this is probably not the right way to model the data. And I think Marco Russo at the conference, he made a comment that a poorly designed data model will increase the complexity of your DAX. And I think I would agree with that. Like if you don't shape the data correctly before you get it into the Tabular model, it will make it harder later on to build the measures. So if you need better, so let me say this another way. There are certain ways you want to display the data in visuals, and a lot of that might be restructuring or pivoting data or doing something with the data so that the measures can be simple, but you have the additional controls. Like if I want to have a slicer that selects or removes columns from a matrix, I need to pivot the columns back into a single column and make a long table and not a wide table. It's a technique you can use, but that way you can dynamically select the number of columns in the matrix using a slicer. Very cool technique, but it requires you have to know how to like get to that design to make it function.
In a poorly designed model, all of a sudden you need a calculated column just for a related, or you need a calculated table.
I was going to say
and
that
all these things come in, and that's when it begins to bog down.
Yes,
that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
I was going to say if there's any calculated columns, I'm already like rip those out. What can we do to get rid of them? What can we do to get rid of them?
Yeah, the wide table versus narrow.
Yep.
Right? Column store indexing. You know how the in-memory model compresses data is super important to keep in mind. I think I want to dovetail on what you just said, Mike, because Marco and Alberto are known for like DAX, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows that they are probably the foremost experts in DAX.
Oh, totally.
The thing that blew my mind is when you go listen to them speak or take their courses or read their books or whatever, they're not like, one of their core tenets is simplify your DAX by spending time on your model.
Yes.
Right. Like,
yes.
People always think, oh, I can solve it with the DAX. No, like that upfront thinking, or the step you skip in the beginning to just add another table, it makes your life so much harder downstream.
Yes.
And there are those choices that you can make upfront in the model to solve downstream solutions that you should be thinking about, or even willing to refactor if your life is going to be made easier, rather than creating some really complex DAX solutions downstream.
So let me ask the question, because the way we're kind of talking about this is almost like a mechanic who's looking at a car, whether it's their car or someone else's. It's kind of like you open the hood, and I'm sure that a mechanic probably goes through the same steps for the first thing. Like, okay, let's see what we're dealing with. And I imagine for you guys too, they're very similar, whether it's your model or someone else's. What are the kind of the first things that you really do? And it's like, all right, it's time to kind of clean this. We need to take a look. What are the first few things that you guys always kind of look at to kind of see what you're dealing with?
So one of the things I'll start with is I usually go looking for calculated columns. That's probably one of the first things I'm looking for. The next thing I'm after that, I'm probably going around and looking at some of the data model pieces. If there's any weird relationships, looking for tables that have inactive relationships, because the measures if there are tables that have inactive relationships, either they're not used or someone brought them in there and thought they were going to be used, or you've written a special measure to use that inactive relationship. So I know just by looking at the data model part, there's potentially calculations that are harder, more complex. And I'm looking for the use relationship function inside the measures. So those are the kind of the first two things I think I'm looking for, to figure out why they're there and if I can remove them.
So I always start at the source. I always start with Power Query, especially if it's an import model,
Sure.
and to see what they're doing.
Good
Because
point.
because sometimes why are there 5 merges on this table? Is it all coming from the same database? Can you do that in SQL first? Why is there 3 group bys? Again, can you do that in SQL? Because to me, it starts with that ability to load the data first, even before you get to, let's say, the relationships in DAX. So I always start with, let's kind of see how many queries there are on Power Query, how many steps are all those steps needed, are all those queries needed?
Yeah.
And then where can we clean that? Can I remove some of these queries and do this in SQL? Or can I just optimize this a little better? And that's really the first. And also that helps me understand what we're dealing with.
Sure.
Because that understands what all of the queries are. To me, it's a better way to kind of understand, you got to kind of know the lay of the land first.
Yeah.
And I start there, and then it's kind of saying, how long does that load take if I can clean that in any way? Then, just like you said, let's look at the relationships in the models, just to see, like, are we using calculated columns? Are we using measures at all? And the measures in the visuals, like what's actually being used in the report out? Because if we have all these tables, but okay, none of these things are being used in any page. And there's a few tools out there that can do that, but I always like to start on those that 2-step approach. But I always start with Power Query first.
Yeah,
I like, man, Mike, you keep bringing it up, and I don't think enough people do it. Which is, what is not being used?
It's
Right?
hard to...
all the bloat, right? And
Yeah.
I think by nature, I think that's why we dive into finding the tools that can give insights. And it's not to say that, like, there isn't validity to being a little nervous about removing something from the model, especially if it's the main model on, that's servicing up a bunch of reports.
Totally.
At the same time, due to that fear of, like, not wanting to break something, depending on how large that thing is in terms of consuming memory or consuming bandwidth in a model, going through all the steps to verify, check all the reports might be worth it to actually rip it out. And I don't think enough people do that. So I think you always inherently have some parts of your model that are no longer needed.
Yeah.
So it's not the first place I look, depending on what the issue is with the model, right? I agree with you, Tommy. If it's load times, like Power Query, or understanding, like, what's happening to shape, structure, jigger with the data prior to pushing it into the model, could be something I look at. But in terms of just the model, the first place I always look is just size and cardinality, right? Of all of the columns and relationships within the model itself, to understand, where are potentially the problems going to exist just by purely looking at the sizes of those things.
Awesome. Yeah, that's another. So I think that's a really good point there. Size of different elements inside the report. So we've been talking about, like, cleaning up measures, cleaning up columns, cleaning up the M code. There's also a case here for, are you bringing in too much data, right? I mean, there's a couple things here that I think around that end. I think a lot of newer users bring in the entire table all the time, no matter what, which I think in development phase is maybe appropriate, right? You don't know what you're going to need from that data table,
right?
But you're going to bring in everything. On the flip side of that, though, when you publish the report, you're probably not using every single column that you're bringing in. So there's probably some columns that you've brought in that are not needed, or you've brought in 5 years of data, and the report people or the report you built is only looking at a year or 2 years, or doing a year-over-year comparison. So there's also potential for having just too much data in the model, and there's no reason to continually just load that model larger and larger if that data is never being touched. Why have the partitions? Why waste the space? Why add the overhead if it doesn't make sense for it to be there?
Yeah, and I agree with that, right? And when I say size and cardinality, right?
Yeah.
The reason for that is, typically I understand what the business is, right? You understand the data sets that you're expecting. And there have been many times where I've popped open a model and looked at one of the tables and realized, like, no, that can't be right, because I know the size of that table shouldn't be exceeding, my fact table. Like, why is my dimension so large?
Yeah.
Oh, dude,
Yeah.
like, I have to
Yeah,
go
that's
back and, like,
Dead giveaway.
filter down this dimension to only be the set of companies that I care about or something.
That's
right?
so true. Yeah.
That happens all the
time.
The other thing is, depending on the tool you're using, right? And we want to dovetail into there. Obviously,
Right.
like DAX Studios is the go-to for me just in finding this information. Is I can see immediately whether or not automated, like the automatic date tables are being used, right?
Yes.
Like what are
Ooh.
other areas that I'm not like inherently just going to see in the PBIX file as far as a model is concerned, like all of the other components that are potentially increasing the size or causing performance problems that aren't as visible.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's a great place to go into the tools, like kind of like where do you start? Because obviously you can look at the report itself and kind of go into each part, but there's some really awesome tools out there to really help that initial what's being bloated and what's really affecting that. For me, it starts with Vertipack Analyzer. That's like the number one start I would go to. And it's like, once I kind of understand the tables, the number of columns, the visuals, it starts with using Vertipack Analyzer created by Marc Russo. It's now really, it's actually pre-baked into two tools, right? It's in DAX Studio.
I was gonna say, So I wanted to point that out because like everyone's like, well, where do I go download Vertipack Studio? You don't have to. It's in two other tools that you can automatically use. Yeah.
Vertipack, or it's in DAX Studio and in Tabular Editor 3. I personally, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for those of you who are not familiar with Vertipack Studio, I'm just gonna give a quick here's what it is. Imagine just like general table statistics. There's a couple things that you look for when you look at models. You look for column by column, how many records or how many distinct records are in each column. That's something that's important. And then you're also looking for that's called cardinality. So there's like a word, so the number of unique records in the product ID column or whatever that may be. And then if you have a high cardinality, meaning I have a large number of rows and I have a large number of unique values, that's going to take up more space in the data model. It just will. It doesn't compress very well.
Yeah.
And then the other one was how large are the columns, right? So the size of them. So if I have long text strings, like I have descriptions of products in a list, those will be more intensively, or they will be stored and take up more room than like an integer or a whole number or something like that. So there's numbers compress much better inside a column, and you'll see that the volume of data in a numerical column is much less. I just want to bring those 2 points up.
Yeah, and honestly,
opposite. Like you could have very large. You could have a very
high cardinality, low cardinality column, but text, and it still takes up a lot of space. Is that what you're saying?
No, because the cardinality would be like very high in a text column. It'd be very low in an integer column.
Yes.
And the volumes usually correspond with one another. But if it's very large volume and low cardinality, that's not a bad thing.
That's correct. Agreed.
If it's large and large cardinality, you understand the potential problem.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
I
just want to
you're right.
make sure I understood what you were saying.
No, sorry if I was confusing, but you can have the ability of having, like, let's say I make a long key that defines a record, right? I could have a lot of those, a GUID. I could have a GUID in there somewhere, a globally unique identifier or whatever. I think it's what it's called.
Nice.
But it's a number. So I hate GUIDs. They are the worst thing. Everyone hates GUIDs, but they work really, really well because it uniquely identifies stuff. It's really it's good with what it does. The sucky part is it's a string, and it's a very long 16 character string or something. 30. I don't know. It's a really ridiculously long number string and has numbers and letters, so you just can't convert it to a number, and then it would compress nicely.
Right.
So someone needs to make some kind of like GUID hasher or some kind of something that can hash a GUID into a single number. That way you can store them more efficiently. I'm going to throw it out there for all 10 of you who listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
If
there's someone in Denmark who can help with this.
If someone has a GUID hasher that you can turn GUIDs into numbers, that would be a really big win. So send me a link, hit me on Twitter or hit us on LinkedIn or something like that if you have that solved already.
Yeah. Honestly, with Vertipack Analyzer, even for a relatively clean model, there's some things that I do almost like spring cleaning or house cleaning. Looking at, because it'll tell you the column size, the percentage of the database size or the dictionary size relative to the entire model. So you may have some columns that you don't use, like first and last name, email, or date time, when you really just need date because you added a date column, but you're not using the date and time. You're like, why is this taking up 15% of my entire model and I'm never using it? So those are things I do regardless if I'm trying to clean a model or not, just to understand, can I just take out any particular body fat, so to speak?
Yeah. Awesome. So after doing that, so I'm going to maybe pivot here just slightly. We talked about removing columns and things. I think there's an idea around, there's two kinds of removing data pieces, right? So we have this concept of there's a model and report together. I've built the model, and the report is in the same model file. It's one PBIX. So model and report all together. It's easier to delete a column or remove something there and see where it did or did not break anything.
Right.
Where I think where it gets a lot harder is when you break those two apart. And now I have thin reports and models. And so I have one model that supports many reports, because if I remove a column, I need to kind of go through and kind of spot check all the different reports, and that could be quite time consuming.
Right.
So are there any tools that you guys use or have heard about or stumbled upon that help you more with the latter of this, right? And we're talking about like removing date columns, those kind of things. To me, that feels very like you still do that on the thin report and model perspective, but like I feel like the challenge gets harder when you have the thin report and model. Anything there that you guys have bounced into?
So for the actual thin report, the one thing I would probably say, actually, I've never tried Ike Friedman's Power BI Cleaner tool on a thin report, like on a dependent model or the dependent report.
Yep.
But I imagine that would work.
I have. That one's a good one.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll let you run through that one.
Yep. I actually was Googling all these things on the side here to make sure I had them ready to go. So this is it's called the Power BI Cleaner tool. And this is a tool that it uses actually the PBIX file or PBIT file. So basically what you do is you have a model, you have a PBIX file, the thin report points to the model. And so then you open the PBIX file, you save it as a PBIT file. And then what happens when you save something as a PBIT file, you get the definition of the file, and it's kind of in a structured way. Mm-hmm. So this tool, there's like two tools to this. There's an Excel version of the tool, and there's like a Power BI version. So the Power BI is kind of like saying, here's everything that is linking together. You can, and Imke's done an amazing job on just unwinding the PBIT file. There's a lot in there, but she's telling you which measures are used, which visuals they're connected to. Oh. Are there formulas that are being used to drive color? Does that link to something inside of a measure somewhere? So it basically can give you a readout and say these columns are needed and these measures are required. These are not. They're not being used anywhere. With this, though, the Excel tool has another advantage. The Excel tool allows you to point an Excel file. It does the same thing, I think, Power Query. You load up all the PBIT files, and it will say, these things are unneeded, and she will auto-write the scripts for Tabular Editor that you can go over to Tabular Editor and just hit run, and it will remove those objects.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like an easy button there. Just, and if you're given a lot of models and you're cleaning stuff up, tools like this are very helpful and time-saving, because now you don't have to go through one thing at a time and trying to figure out where the column is all over the place. And yeah, so I would highly recommend that. That tool is another good one.
There's actually, there's two other ones I want to highlight. I believe work with the thin report. There's the Data Visionaires, Power BI Documenter.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it tells you everything. That it shows you everything that's being used on a report page. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to remove.
Yep.
But it gives a really good understanding what's on the report, including the canvas. And also Michael Kowalski on Elegant BI, he has something called the Export Report Objects. It's a tabular editor script. You point to the report path, so it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the model. And it'll actually show you per page what slicers, filters on the filter pane, what's being used on report objects, what visuals are being shown. So that's a really good overview too. It's a very more detailed look. You call it the technical version, so to speak, of what's in your report model. Just kind of get an understanding of where is the bloat or unneeded. So
for Michael Kowalski, I'm going to get his name wrong. I apologize, Michael. I'll get his first name right because I know that one very well. Michael's tool. Is it the one around exporting report objects? Is that the one you're talking about? Okay. So have you used I've reached out to the guys at Data Visioneer, and we're actually working with them right now to figure out how to incorporate their tool into the Power BI Business Ops tool, because this is another one of these great external tools that work very well. I will admit there's a free trial with it. I think you get a couple of free reports
Mhm.
out of the gate. I do want to be clear that this is not sponsored, but if you use Data Visioneer where you go through and basically they're doing a similar thing to what Imke is doing. They're
Mhm.
reading the template, the PBIT file, and they're extracting all the data out for you. And they have like graphs, like here's how everything's relating, here's all the different row level security. So you can kind of like it's like a report about the
Right.
objects of the report.
Right.
But it is a paid service, and if you need to use this on a lot of reports, there's a paid feature to it. So that just be aware of that one. Michael Kowalski's is definitely much more code. You're in Tabular Editor. You're running a custom C# script that's inside the advanced scripting window in Tabular Editor. And it's funny, they're only using Tabular Editor to run the script. There's actually nothing in Tabular Editor that it's doing other than put code here, hit go kind of thing. And it just does its automatic thing. And it outputs a whole bunch of information into files on your machine that describe all the elements and everything that's inside the files. So there's a ton of stuff it outputs. Report filters, pages, page filters, all your visuals, any of the visual filters, all the visual objects, custom visuals, bookmarks, and then it gives you the bookmark where it is, the bookmark name, report ID, page ID, which honestly, bookmarks and documenting them, freaking hard. Like no one documents bookmarks because it's not. I have a blog with Steve Campbell and around this exact topic because you need like a method to know what bookmarks are doing what in your report, and then all your connection types. So I'll put that link out there as well. Seth, you were going to say something? Looks like you were going to jump in there.
Man, I'm going to completely derail because I was not familiar with, I was familiar with Elegant BI, but not who's behind it, which is Michael Kowalski.
See, I'm really bad with names.
Because every time you guys said it, all I could think about was Mike Kowalski in
Mike
Monsters Inc.
He's doing Tabular Editor.
Where it was like, where I'm like, there's no way.
Mike Wazowski.
I didn't want to make fun of a guy's name or anything, but that's why I had to go look it up.
That's why I like Pixar so much.
Every time you said it, I was like, little green man, little green man. Like,
word associations.
Kowalski.
Yeah, I got it all wrong. Michael, I apologize.
I do as well.
We're gonna stick with Mike or Michael. We'll just go with it.
Until next episode, when we probably bring him up again because we always bring him up and say it wrong again. Unless we have any more on the tools, I did have another question when because we're dealing with really again like the most basic things under the hood.
Yes,
like kind of like our best approaches. So unless we had anything still in that space, I wanted to kind of bring it up a notch in terms of sometimes these tools can work, but I don't know if you guys have ever run into a situation because unfortunately I know I have where you kind of go through this, but it still doesn't solve your problem or it still doesn't help you identify what to do. And it goes to me where I have a decision tree, like, do I just blow it up and try again or like start over and rebuild it?
That's a good point.
Or do I keep going into it? And so I guess my question for you guys is, when does it really get complicated? And what do you do when you have to do an alternative approach to try to clean?
I think there comes, I think in some levels, there comes a point in time where there's no going back. I think certain models get large enough and they're used enough that you can't just start over. I mean, you could, but I think you're going to spend a lot more time to like clean and move forward.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of, if you're going to have to test a lot of things, I'm a big proponent of being able to build your solutions so that you can test offline. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to always have to rely on taking a model, pushing it to the service, and then looking at all your live reports in the service to see if something broke. What you really wanted to be able to do is I want to be able to take a copy of the model, bring it locally, delete out, like use the BI accountant's tool, delete out the stuff I don't think I need, and then go into each thin report and see if something broke. I think you need to be able to do that offline, and then once you feel like you've got confidence around that and it's been thoroughly tested with like a process you developed, and I think this is going to go. We've had a ton of these conversations already where we're talking about like, what's your BI governance? How does that process look? What does it take to get something into the model? I think you need to, in the same way, you need to have a method to deprecate things. Like it is as important to have a process to launch, but I think there also needs to be a very clear process on how to deprecate and bring it back
Yeah.
and take it down, essentially. So I guess that wasn't a really great answer, Tommy, from my side. I think I'm just kind of rambling there, but I mean, I think it's hard. It's not easy to get through what to pull out of the model. My opinion, build your models and your system in a way that you could do it offline.
Yeah.
Bring it down to your local machine, change what you need to change. Therefore, you've got an area where you can break things without issue. That would be kind of one of my things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with those. And to your points, I think the outside of just performance tuning the model, making it as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The challenges for me come when it's the additional requests, right,
Mhm.
for data, right, and all of a sudden it doesn't fit really well in what you built, and how do you have to
Yeah.
refactor, and that's where Mike is alluding to the diminishing returns. Do you just start over on a new version of something,
Yeah.
or is it that wild of a request that how you built things is going to blow things up? But it also that's why I think it's really important to spend time up front, not just thinking about the requirements you have now, but the data model behind the scenes that could potentially be added to this type of model or reporting in the future. And does your model support that? Does it support the growth of this particular element within the business? Just because they're not asking for it now doesn't mean that Sue over in sales is going to be like, hey, I want this data, right? And that has to be incorporated. So I think those are the challenges. You rip through those all the time. Like, how do you make things work depending on how somebody wants the particular filter or a particular thing to work in a visual on a page, or what that interaction and experience is. All of a sudden, if you have multiple fact tables and they want to cut a continuous experience on slicers, and you don't have a dimension to support those, what do you do, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the more challenging pieces that you just have to walk through and determine how big of a lift it's worth to shift or build net new.
Right.
To Mike's point, I love the fact that over when Microsoft launched Gen 2, right, and just in terms of like premium capacity, that model supports testing. It supports having multiple models that are of a large size without me having to increase exponentially into a massive P1, P2, P3, whatever, just to manage the memory of all my models. So if you're not familiar, Gen 2 allows you to basically only look at the largest model that you have, right? So, and these are independently being kind of charged against, per se. So it allows us to have those multiple different versions, and especially in the thin report realm, have test versions of those reports, so that when you want to make those choices about model cleaning, removing things, taking automated scripts and ripping through, ripping stuff out, you can have a test bed of reports that you're validating that nothing broke, that that change is kosher before you push it out to the production environment. I think that's where we'd also love to have deployment pipelines be part of that, right? Instead of having to have manual processes in all these steps. But ultimately, when you get into a model that's servicing a lot of different reports, that's also a challenge, is just making sure that the changes that you're making are validated and QA'd before being pushed out into the realm, because you don't know who you're impacting.
Okay, I'm gonna blow you guys' mind here. Seth, you hit a keyword. You ready for this? Seth, you just hit a keyword that I just learned about over at the conference. I was talking with the most amazing developer around Power BI things, Rui Romano. Rui Romano. Yeah. He has just recently built, and it's out on GitHub. It is a Power BI DevOps PowerShell script. And so, wait, it gets better. There are some challenges with being able to deploy reports. Some of them which are, if you publish a report or if you delete a report and bring it back, you blow up a GUID. And if you're doing embed, that's not good.
It's a big
It's
problem.
a bear. And so having to be able to keep that GUID the same and replace the report content but not break the connection string is a problem. So Rui has built this entire process where he has 2 JSON files that describe what reports you're going to publish, what data connections they will connect to, and what workspaces you will put them in. And it automates everything. It builds the workspaces. It pushes the reports. If you have a report that you need to replace the content, he pushes.
Where's that link?
he pushes a temp file. The temp file is pushed, and then what he does is he does a replace content with the actual file, then deletes the temp file. It's literally and you just run PowerShell scripts. That's right off of your desktop, and you can just, so it's PowerShell. You can automate this stuff, and so now you have. I know. I'm going to get you the link. So Rui and I are going through it together now, and he's giving me the code and sending it out on GitHub. But we're going to refine it now, and I'm going to try to incorporate all. So Rui has made this amazing process. So what I'm working right now is I'm going to try and take all of that code goodness, and we're going to try to bolt it into Business Ops. So now we have a single tool that you just log into, and now you can then define how you want to deploy these reports. Talk directly to Department Account Service.
Share the link.
And we need to
Rui got the GUI.
We need to wrap up so Mike can go work on that.
Dude, I'm telling you, it solves so
many
big problems. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and Data Marc wrote a huge thing too on DevOps and Power BI too.
Yep.
I have that.
Yeah, so it's called Rui Romano PBI. It's called PBIdevOps. So I'm dropping the link right now.
Nice.
Wow, just so much. Wow, I'm just like, the conference was worth it just for me to learn about this stuff. I mean, it's not documented at all. So that's one of the things I'm working with Rui right now is we're going to do some videos on it to document, like, how does it work? How do you set it up? What does it do? So this is
podcast was worth the price of admission.
Here's your free DevOps drop. you can. All right, so let me just cut this
hilarious.
Up. So from Rui.
What about you, Tommy?
So I was going to say, this kind of goes all full circle. First, you need to send this on every channel that we're streaming towards.
No,
and I'll add it on this will be in the podcast episode description as well. So if you're listening right now, you're like, crap, just look at the description of the episode. You'll be able to find it.
Sure.
I was going to say everything we're talking about now, and this more complicated thing, to me, it almost goes full circle when we're talking about Russo and Ferrari when it comes to a good data model, because to me, the complications, it's not so much about the bloated part, but the bloatedness is all about dependencies, and it's basically whether it's the queries or you have these, you have 18 DAX measures in a column and everything's dependent on one another. It's not so much about taking something out, but what can you take out and what's going to affect something else. That's where my complications, I think, go to another level.
Yeah.
Especially with Power Query, especially when you're like, okay, I have 6 queries and they're all somewhat connected in some way. Mm-hmm. And basically, and especially if you're loading some, because if you remove one, but it may be used somewhere else, we're really talking all about the model and in terms of relationships and measures and the canvas. I don't know if it's also called a model in Power Query, but maybe there's another name for that. But how do you actually format and structure all your queries together? Because if you have all these interrelationships between queries, again, that maybe you just have this entire table that's only being emerged, but you're also loading it and some reason using in your report. That's not an easy fix. That's not something you can just remove. And again, with DAX measures too, where you might have the year-to-date, previous year, and then you're doing some crazy other thing. Some things that I do with that is I have to sometimes get out the pen and paper and look at my queries, say, okay, what are my base queries?
Yep.
What is that relating towards? And then what can I do there?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, going back to Tabular Editor, I think Tabular Editor 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
You can 2 or 3. You can actually right click on any object and say, look at the dependencies, just like you could in SSMS.
Can you do that in 2 though?
Yeah.
I didn't know you could do that in 2. So 3 has a beautiful.
3 has a great one.
Yeah. So I'll give 3 a big pitch here because this has become my staple tool that I work with. Anything on a tabular model anymore, and I'm trying to get to a point where can I use in Tabular Editor 3 to make everything?
Right.
Can it be my entire data modeling tool? I think it can. But one of the things you can do is you can say peek on the definition, and so in line with your DAX code, it'll open up a little window. And you can peek at what that measure is doing and see what it's referencing. And that, to me, is incredibly helpful because how many times are you using a measure and another measure And so you can peek the definition, or you can go to the definition, and it literally opens up the DAX measure where it came from, which is super helpful to know.
Is there a keyboard shortcut, or is it just right click?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a keyboard shortcut for it. I don't know if it's in this version, but in future versions, you will be able to make your own keyboard shortcuts. So if it doesn't have one, you're going to be able to make your own. So regardless, yes, I think the answer is yes, but it just may not be there right now, this very moment. So
good. A little off topic. I also saw on the roadmap, C# IntelliSense is coming for Tabular Editor 3,
which is what we need because we're dumb and can't write a lot of C# inside there. But another point I'll throw out there. If you this is a good one. This is like a community thing. I have started my own scripts GitHub repo around everything related to Tabular Editor scripting. So if you have Tabular Editor scripts, or if you want to go learn about what they do and how, like, examples of them, there's now a library of a number of MVPs contributing basic scripts, simple things like add a description, or format this measure, or hide it, or take this column, make it a measure. So I've started grooming a library of stuff, and it's actually a fork from Daniel O'Keefe's script library, but he hasn't really been maintaining it. So I'm going to just be a little bit more active and bring as many of the things I can from the community into a single location. So
absolutely huge.
I will drop that in the Tabular Editor window. Tommy, you've contributed some stuff to it, I believe. So we're constantly looking for, like, anyone can jump on this. Anyone can contribute scripts to this. We want you to do that. It helps you be faster, and it helps someone else who maybe look at this stuff to be quicker as well. I'll go find the link for that one too.
Guys, I love everything that we've been talking about today, because I'm sure as we're having the conversation, I'm identifying like 2 or 3 reports that I'm probably going to open up as soon as we close the call, or the episode. Don't want to say call. I don't want to get yelled at again for calling this.
It feels like a call anymore, right?
Yeah. But
we'll take caller on line 3.
Yeah, I might call for support. Yeah, I can use some of my DevOps PowerShell script. Thanks.
Amazing.
But it's definitely. I really do see this as kind of a mechanic approach. But I guess I'll kind of give my final comments on just the whole idea of cleaning and optimizing, and really, again, making it full circle. It really starts at the beginning. Seth, you alluded to this moments ago, that I really think is the first part, is never build a report just thinking that you're going to do it only for that singular purpose. Build it for how can this be scalable?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you might have this one-off approach or one-off request, like, hey, we just need to see the top 5 customers doing X, Y, and Z, but build it in a way that it's like, no, we actually need to see the top 25 also doing this, this, and this in this relation. Build a good data model that can be scaled, that can be purpose for multiple uses.
Agreed.
Doesn't mean bloat it with everything, but build it in a way that you don't have to, delete 18 objects to add 5.
Yep.
So that's always, I think, where you should start, where you can avoid a lot of the situations.
Yep.
But then the other part too is utilize those tools that you can, again, I always think of the Indiana Jones, like where he's always kind of putting an object as farther he goes down the cave, so to speak, where he always has the rope to know where he's going.
Yeah, exactly.
So someone told me this once, and I love it. It's like, if you can't explain your model to another report author, it's not a good model.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't walk them through it, better yet, if they look at it and they can't track back the source, if they're looking at a table and they can't see where the source is and understand how you did it, it's not a good model. So starting there is paramount. And then the other part of that too is like going through and cleaning. Do you need email in that table? Because are you using that? Is it used for, a dependency? Is it used in a visual? And cleaning out that way too, because those little things will add up over time. So that's kind of like my summary of what's always the best practice from cleaning and optimizing.
I agree with that a lot, wholeheartedly. And I would also, to your point right there, Tommy, what made me think of this is, I think there's actually a good amount of, before you even build any complicated measures, before you do anything, I think there's a couple things you want to do in your model. I think you want to turn off. So there's a feature inside the model where I don't know the name of the feature, and we'll have to maybe Google this later. You can turn off implicit measures, and you can turn off date time calendar. So if I'm starting from scratch, if I'm going to start from the very beginning, I'm going to turn off implicit measures. I'm going to turn off auto date time calendar, and I will go through all my columns, and I will build a single measure for what it is, sum of this column, average of this column, what I think I'm going to need. And in my base model, I'll just build that. Just do that first. And I think if you start there, and then this is where it gets a little bit more tricky for me, like what's the right process? I don't think there's a right process in here, but like once you have that done, that is the most basic thing. That is the simplest stuff. There's no calculated columns. You got a star schema going on. You started from a good baseline. Now I think it's a really good opportunity to jump over to like a thin report and then do your experimentation there. Experiment. Do what you want to do. Make as many measures you want. Don't care. Make it all work. Because what you can do at the end of the day is, once you have the thin report established, you can take a copy of it and just start deleting stuff until it's happy. Or you can have a lot of development things that you just don't need, and it could be throwaway work, but it could be part discovery work too. So I feel like there's something there around the process where you build this core kind of key model element, and then all the other elements that you're talking about are just kind of like in the thin report. And then once you're done, you can then sit back and say, okay, are there any measures in my thin report that I would need to promote to use in many reports? And then you can have this kind of again, thoughtful consideration around what you're bringing over so you don't bring over bloat.
So here's where philosophical design actually comes into play now.
Oh, okay. There we go.
This is philosophical. As you're building, is there a purpose for this?
True. Yes. Can I use it multiple times?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my closing thoughts would be this. Ultimately, we're talking about cleaning models, but and there might be some listeners that don't consider or think they need to. If you're building a model that's going to scale, right, in some way, shape, or form, and be around for a while, I would always recommend taking the time up front to make the right decision in terms of the model itself in supporting things in the future, as opposed to just throwing something in, because the challenges that you're going to create for yourself downstream are going to be harder to solve when you are forced to go clean a model. So as we're building, as you're continually adjusting and tweaking things, make the hard choices. And sometimes there's a lot of work involved in reshaping or readjusting, queries and connections and whatnot to pull the appropriate data in and shape it or reshape it correctly. That those decisions will never cause you problems downstream, right? So just keep in mind that you're gonna have to clean at some point in time.
Yep.
So incrementally, it's always easier to take what may feel like a big lift and solve for it, as opposed to putting yourself in a position where you have a lot of hard things to solve for.
Yeah. I think this is going to bode very well for our next conversation, which I think is coming up in the next couple of weeks, is how do you plan? Like, what planning techniques do you use to be able to get through some of these large cleanup activities? Right. And like, there's a backlog of work that you got to figure out how to get through. You don't have time now. The business needs it yesterday. So how do we go back? How do we clean up? What do we call it, Tommy? It's not the backlog.
Technical debt. That's actually next episode.
So it's where you recognize something's wrong and you don't have the time to go fix it. That's tech debt. Like, you just add it up, man. That's the
technical debt.
You need to do.
So with that, I think that's very good ending thoughts. So stay tuned for Thursday's podcast, because we're going to go through a bit more around like how to address technical debt. What is it? And maybe some techniques that we use to get through technical debt, and again, continually moving your models forward and being productive. With that, thank you all for very much listening to the podcast. We appreciate the community. You guys are a lot of fun. You come up with great questions, and we just really enjoy engaging with the broader Power BI community. Thank you very much for listening. The only thing we ask is, if you enjoyed the podcast, please find one other person, either at your company or someone you've talked to about Power BI. Just recommend it to them. We'd like you just to say, this is something engaging. If you want to learn a couple nuggets and tease Tommy and Mike a little bit, and just reach out to someone and say, check this out. Please share the link, and please share it with someone else that you think that might find this valuable. Tommy, where can you find the podcast?
So if you're watching the podcast live right now, you can actually listen to it on any podcast platform. If you're listening right now to a pre-recorded podcast, you can actually join the conversation live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. Please leave us a review, a rating on Apple and Spotify if you really do enjoy the conversation.
Yes.
And like Mike said, if you like it, if you like to tweet or post, spread the word. We really enjoy the community.
Thank you all so much, and we'll see you guys on Thursday.